If you thought silencers were just for spy movies, buckle up. Today's legislation has some thoughts. Welcome back to Beyond the Bill Number, the show where we unpack the bills shaping America. Today, we're diving into something a bit quieter than usual. Gun silencers, or as the cool kids call them, suppressors.
I must really not be cool because I did not know that they were called that until I wrote this post.
And isn't that part of the reason why we do this? To learn things.
Yes. Speaking of learning, I think I remember seeing something about in the UK that it's only legal to get a gun if you're trying to use it for hunting or I live on a farm. Is that true? Because the hunting piece of owning a firearm and using it for that is kind of a big theme of our topic today.
It really is, isn't it? Well, I mean, it's almost impossible to get a firearm in the UK. We have the strictest gun laws in the world. So you can go shooting at a gun club of some kind, but the guns like live there. Farmers have them. They're allowed to have shotguns, but only shotguns, and they are very, very strictly regulated. I mean, there was an occasion when some farmer went rogue and shot some people with a shotgun a while back. So we strengthened up all the laws. So the way we got here, though, is quite interesting. So we are proud to be the first country in the world to have gun control legislation way back in the time of Elizabeth I, when firearms had just been invented, and somebody was proudly showing her this brand new invention, the old flintlocks and all that kind of thing. And she sort of looked at this and thought immediately, oh dear, somebody could probably use that to assassinate me. That would be a great weapon for an assassin, wouldn't it? And at the time, she was a Protestant monarch in a largely Catholic country, and a lot of people who quite objected to this. So she was worried about her safety. So she introduced a law that banned firearms for Catholics. So only Protestants allowed to own guns, which was classic of the time. But then we also have introduced a lot of legislation over the years. So where we had a really big, really devastating sort of school shooting back in the 80s. It was awful, and Dunblane massacre, as it was called. And after that, of course, as happens in most countries around the world, the politicians scrambled to pass laws, and the various political parties competing with each other to see who could be stricter, what stricter laws they could enact. And they enacted these very, very strict laws. And then the government changed just a few months later. Tony Blair came in with Labour government. The very first thing the Blair government did was to modify the law to make it stricter, even stricter. And that banned all handguns. Handguns are completely banned. And then, as I say, there's very, very, very severe restrictions on any other kind of firearm, which means that you don't see a lot of guns in the UK.
Unlike if you're at a Starbucks in Texas, where you see one on everybody's hip.
Absolutely. Because, of course, you need to be armed if you're in Starbucks, though. It's perfectly reasonable. What about if they give you the wrong coffee?
Or, they don't make it with enough vanilla pumps or whatever.
Got to be able to defend yourself.
Yes, yeah. Every time I talk to anyone that's from somewhere with a reasonable or even intense gun control, it's pretty crazy because I'm from Colorado, so we had the biggest first school shooting here in Columbine.
Absolutely.
And I remember that very viscerally from when I was a little kid.
I've spent a lot of time in the US, and one of the first things I did when I first came out was I forced my wife to take me shooting because I had great guns. So we went to a gun range, shot lots of guns. She was quite shocked to find out how many of her friends had lots of guns that she didn't even realize. And I get it. It's an enormous amount of fun. Guns are great. They're fantastic. I absolutely love them. Doesn't mean I want them to be legal, though. Sometimes you have to give things up, don't you, for the safety of everybody. And the life of even one child isn't worth all the fun in the world playing around with guns. So I absolutely support having very strict gun control laws.
Yes. Yeah, it's been an interesting history for guns here, and I feel like a lot of this is a lot about framing, a lot about how this branding that we've had with guns over the years of the right to bear arms. We need to have our well-regulated militia here because, God forbid, you UK people come back over here and take our guns and try to make us pay tax on tea.
Absolutely. It could happen.
Yep,
we're just waiting. We're poised.
Yes.
As soon as you enact any kind of gun control legislation, we'll be back.
Yeah, you're setting sail. Well, I think that kind of gets into a lot of this, which is the branding. So let's get into this very interesting topic today.
Yes, back to silencers. So silencers have been around since the 1930s, but why are these suppressors suddenly making such legislative noise in 2025?
That is a really great question, actually. So let's start by saying that suppressors aren't like the silencers that you might see in films, where the sound is reduced to just a little pew pew. It's more to reduce the noise and the muzzle flash, but it doesn't do it that much. So on a small caliber weapon, you'll still get around 110 decibels of sound, which is still loud, but it's just not as loud. Suppressors have been on the books, the legislative law books, since the National Firearms Act of 1934. Back then, lawmakers saw them as these tools for criminals and how they might use them to actually poach game or, commit crimes in a more stealthy way. A lot of this was happening during the Great Depression, and they were really worried about a lot of poaching because people were trying to feed their families. But this was also a huge rise in our history of organized crime. You can think of the mobsters and all those kind of great movies.
Yeah.
It really kind of had a bad brand back then, which is how they ended up getting on the books. And they didn't make them illegal because that's just too much here. We have to do things through very circumvented means. But they bundled silencers actually with machine guns and sawed-off shotguns as a Title II weapon, which made them really expensive and bureaucratically difficult to own. So it's kind of like you're paying a big tax to be able to have them, which by ways of means of people not being able to afford that tax effectively made them illegal. So the tax that you had to pay back then is equivalent to around $5,000 today to just have one of these suppressors or silencers.
Absolutely. So I'm very, very disappointed to learn that movie silencers don't exist, really. I thought that, John Wick was absolute fact and truth. So basically, silencers were treated like some sort of really expensive, highly taxed luxury instead of accessories for hunting or shooting. But now it does seem that legislators want to flip the narrative. Is that right?
Oh, yes, exactly. So the conversation has definitely shifted, and who knows if this is part of a greater marketing scheme by the NRA or just other people. We do live in the age of branding. So instead of being viewed as this kind of tactical gadget for bad actors or maybe even for police, these suppressors are now being kind of rebranded as hearing protection devices for people who do shoot. And that could be for hobby, for fun, that could be for hunting. And the idea is pretty simple here. Gunshots are loud. They hurt your ears. Yeah. Think of them as like a very intense sound at rock concert level noises, and suppressors reduce that noise enough to protect your hearing without making the gun silent. So none of that. It's a public health angle instead of wanting access to this kind of angle. And it's definitely gaining traction both federally and at the state level.
It's an interesting angle to take, isn't it? Because it's one that's quite difficult to argue with.
Yeah.
You don't want people's health to be destroyed. You don't want their hearing to be destroyed. So why not make them? As I remember, though, from when I went shooting, everybody wears ear muffles and puts things in your ears and all of that. So clearly everybody who shoots guns isn't deaf now. So that does sort of rob the argument a little bit. But okay. So what's happening on Capitol Hill? Are there any key bills there we should know about?
Yes, plenty. So the big one is HR 404, or the Hearing Protection Act, and that was introduced by Representative Ben Cline from Virginia. And this bill aims to strip suppressors out of the National Firearms Act and regulate them like a regular rifle or shotgun under the Gun Control Act. So that means no more $200 tax stamp, no more registration waiting periods, even though background checks will still stay as part of this. And another interesting facet of this is it requires the Attorney General to destroy all existing suppressor registration records within a year, and it introduces a small 10% excise tax on suppressor sales. It also stops states and localities from adding their own suppressor taxes or registration requirements. And this is kind of an interesting thing here, and we're get a lot into the preemption. Okay, only taxing at the federal level. Okay, but this bill is still in committee, and it's got solid support from gun rights groups.
That's an interesting one, really, particularly the idea of getting rid of all the registrations and destroying all the records and things. Because, as I understand it, this is so that in the future, those perfidious Democrats can't come after people's suppressors or after their guns if there are all these records they could use to track people down. So, yes, it's all about privacy and keeping the Democrats away from your guns. So, there's a Senate companion bill, too?
Yes, Senate Bill 364, which was introduced by Senator Mike Crapo of Idaho. So that basically mirrors H.R. 404, and it targets the Senate Finance Committee, and it has about 33 co-sponsors, and that is a lot of coordinated momentum around something like this. And then there's also the Parts Act, or Senate Bill 1039, and that one tightens up definitions around suppressors and their components to kind of close some legal loopholes that people have been skirting through, and no more piecing together these unregulated parts of what is going on with these guns and how they've tried to regulate to move that forward.
Okay. Mike Crapo? Really? No. Okay.
Never heard that last name
before. And he's a politician. Congratulations, Mike.
Talk about the branding, the age of branding. Here we are.
Exactly. And I heard about the SHUSH Act as well. So what's that one about?
Yes, the SHUSH Act, short for Silencers Help Us Save Hearing. So again, we're really hitting the hearing protection, the saving hearing. This one actually goes even further, and it would completely remove suppressors from the National Firearms Act and treat them as kind of a standard firearm accessory nationwide. It would also eliminate all federal registration, tax, and transfer rules, even retroactively for transfers going back to 2015. Plus, it overrides stricter state and local suppressor laws, which is a pretty bold federal preemption move. And this is a very interesting piece here. And talking about preemption, states' rights, a lot of states are actually putting more intense gun control. And this bill is kind of saying, absolutely not. We will not be having any of this skirting preemption, which a lot of the states have really enjoyed doing. It's definitely the most expansive of the current proposals, and naturally the most controversial.
Yes, absolutely. It's odd, isn't it, that with a bill like this, you want federal to reign supreme over states' rights, and then on so many other issues, it's like, no, state rights must be are sacred. You can't violate them.
Yep.
So the federal stage then is buzzing. So how about in the states? Are they hopping on the hearing protection bandwagon?
Oh, yes, they are. And it's kind of interesting to even see the states that we're going to talk about today being part of this conversation. And to me, it really says that whoever is their PR brand strategist is doing a great job. So states are kind of taking a different but related approach. Some are legalizing suppressors outright. Others are aligning state laws with these federal proposals, and some are even getting a little bit more creative. So let's take New York, a very historically gun control state, very liberal. They are kind of one of the bigger bills, one of the more red bills on Bill Track 50 as it relates to this specific type of legislation. So their S-2099 is really a big deal. It would repeal the state's ban on suppressors and allow hunters and firearm owners to use them legally in practice. It just kind of allows them to be there. And again, this is pretty impressive. It's in committee, but it really does signal this shift of this very traditionally strict state in this wheelhouse. And then we also have Rhode Island. Their Senate Bill 144 legalizes suppressors for hunters. Again, we got that hunter piece in there, using rifles and shotguns that are longer than 17 inches. It prevents local governments from creating patchwork suppressor rules, and it also keeps felony penalties for misuse. So it's deregulation, but it still has some guardrails.
Sounds like Missouri is playing a different game though, right?
Yes, Missouri has two different bills that they have up for debate right now. House Bill 548 and House Bill 898. And this first one legalizes suppressors and exempts Missouri-made devices from federal rules. And the second bill adds a very serious enforcement mechanism. So it empowers citizens to report local agencies who are enforcing the federal suppressor laws that are a little bit more strict than what Missouri would want to do. And again, the Attorney General comes in here. If they find any violations, they can sue and even cut state grants to these agencies. So again, it's kind of a preemption
Missouri
fight here. The House Bill 898 wipes out all pending suppressor charges, which would start in August 2025. So that's kind of a full throttle assertion that the state has control, and it's a very clear message to these federal agencies and local governments that might want to take a different approach.
Now, of course, that's Missouri for you.
Yeah.
So Oklahoma is in the mix too, though, right?
Yes, and it's, we see general similar ideas in a lot of this legislation like we talk about, but their Senate Bill 463 is very similar to Missouri's bill. It exempts suppressors that are made entirely in Oklahoma from federal regulation and requires a made in Oklahoma stamp, and it also empowers the Attorney General to act on complaints about stricter enforcement than what the state would like. It even has an emergency clause for immediate effect, unlike Missouri's, which does have a delayed start.
Okay, so what about states that aren't legalizing suppressors outright but still want to help?
Good point. Montana's House Bill 854 proposed a state income tax credit to help offset the federal $200 stamp. It is kind of a way to try to encourage people to be buying these, to be using hearing protection and making these suppressors more affordable. So not only is it something where it's really recognizing that this is something that can benefit you in a health way, they're trying to get a tax credit for it to actually incentivize people to use it and be able to pay that. So it's not changing anything about the legality, but is trying to increase the adoption of it. This one didn't pass. It does show, though, that there's some different strategies at play that don't necessarily take on trying to legalize something and instead are kind of playing within the confines but making it easier for people to use.
Absolutely. It's okay. So this really does sound like a shift, not just in the laws, but also in how we talk about suppressors.
Right, yeah. Instead of this kind of old tactical weapon narrative, there is this frame of public health, of suppressors here to be protective gear for you and prevent this hearing loss. And similar to the earmuffs and earplugs that you see people using, a lot of people actually don't wear those when they're hunting because they need to hear the animals or other people. It is kind of an interesting and clever way to bridge this gap of guns rights, health advocacy, people wanting more gun accessories available and easier to get. And it's definitely working in a way that's building some bipartisan support.
But as always, there are some concerns though, right?
Right, of course, especially when it comes to firearms. So critics do worry that using suppressor regulations could hamper law enforcement for investigations or increase risks of suppressors falling into the wrong hands. It also is just kind of a debate about whether this reframing truly addresses public safety or it's just kind of trying to sidestep some regulations. It might lead to deeper gun violence issues. It's really just this balance between access, safety, regulation, and trying to understand how this can be the key in moving forward.
So what's next then? How do you see this playing out?
The momentum suggests that more states are going to join the chorus for suppressor reform, especially if these federal bills like the Hearing Protection Act or the SHUSH Act move forward. We could really end up with another patchwork of laws, as we love to say here, with some of the states fully deregulating while others are trying to maintain restrictions. Honestly, the highest level of these bills with the Hearing Protection Act and the SHUSH Act are pretty enforcement heavy for what we see as a federal law trying to be kind of that base level there. So it really will be a test to kind of see how law enforcement could adopt these and whether the public perception keeps kind of shifting towards hearing protection over tactical fear. And honestly, one of the things I'm interested to see is this to me seems like a very business approach to something that is very culturally societal issue of this rebrand, this huge push this way. And I'll be interested to see if next year we're talking about some other piece of very heavily regulated world of guns that has a completely new brand on it, and to see how a a reasonable take and a reasonable argument might be impacting different legislation that people have been trying to pass for years, and just outright saying, hey, we want silencers legalized because we want them, and now it's like, we need it for this health reason. It's kind of a general tone and branding shift that we're also seeing in legislation, and people trying more creative ways to get stuff passed.
It is quite creative. There's also a sort of deep irony there, though, isn't there? That passing gun legislation on safety for safety reasons, not actually addressing the fact that, about 10,000 people a year die from gun-related deaths in the US.
Yep.
Never mind people losing their hearing. A lot of people
maybe
dying.
some of those people die because other people have lost their hearing. Maybe you're saving some of those people's lives. I don't know. You didn't think about that, did you?
It's true. It's true. Interesting. I'd like to see the study that shows that. Yeah. So thanks for unpacking this surprisingly complex and loud topic. As always, it's fascinating to see how the tiniest details in bills can reflect broader shifts in American politics and policy.
Very, very true. Well, thanks, Stephen. It's been a pleasure. And remember, silence might be golden, but in politics, it is never quiet. This has been Beyond the Bill Number. Check out BillTrack50.com to read more about this legislation and see what other states are doing.